This module is an introduction to the Westar Revision C of the ODA Procedures Manual. This version of the manual was approved by the FAA on March 3, 2017, so has been effective for the ODA to operate since that date. Because following the ODA Procedures Manual is so critical to functioning well, if you have questions regarding any material covered today, please email or call Jeff Maskowitz at the contact information provided. Really, any question, get in touch with Jeff. Even if it's in the future, down the road when you're working on something, ask, critique, or offering feedback, please let Jeff know what's working or not working. By the end of this presentation, we should meet the objectives of 1. Being familiar with the general layout of the manual, so you can find information of interest in the future. 2. Having an overview of the key processes the manual contains. And 3. Considering some key points that are unique to Westar's ODA. Developing a manual takes a lot of effort. Those involved in this revision spent days walking through the processes and identifying the good points and those that could be improved. Most unit members are not as intimate with the manual since they don't work with it on a daily basis or weren't part of the team that created the edit. It's important that you become familiar with the process you're using at the time of doing a specific action, though. Don't wing it. The overall layout of the ODA Procedures Manual did not significantly change from what was developed in earlier versions. Each major section of the manual aligns with the corresponding item expected in FAA Order 8100.15. So the flow from the requirements to the location of the manual is pretty straightforward. Though the manual includes 19 sections and 9 appendices, the part that affects unit members' work the most is Section 15, which covers the procedures used to plan, conduct, and close out all aspects of an STC project. The ODA is expected to use procedures that mimic those that the FAA uses, the only difference being unique steps that may be needed because of the FAA being a government entity functions slightly different than an ODA can as a delegated organization. So, not the same as the FAA, but equivalent to. Some of the administrative changes that you'll notice in this version of the manual include the company's name has changed. Instead of Westar Aviation Incorporated, it's been shortened to Westar Aviation. This has no impact to anyone except for when you're filling out paperwork. Remember to not include the incorporated on forms like an 8100-9 or 8100-1. You'll also notice that the way revisions to the manual are tracked has been updated. For starters, the manner in which the Procedures Manual is revised has changed. Major changes will be designated with a letter change like B to C in this case. The FAA will approve those changes before the ODA implements them. Minor changes will be noted with a number, such as C1, C2, etc. These types of changes will be approved by Jeff and provided to the FAA. This will help with being able to make small changes a little bit quicker with less coordination time needed. All manuals and updates will be emailed to unit members so that each person will know what has changed. Manuals are distributed with a revision notice. After you've read and understood the material, please respond via an email acknowledging your understanding within 30 days. If you don't return an acknowledgement, you will not be able to perform any unit member functions. Being in the aviation industry, everyone knows how crazy the language and acronyms are. The manual has a good listing of the common terms and acronyms used by the ODA, so that if you don't recognize something in a report or a discussion, you can always check the list and find out what was meant. Another bit of language change you may notice is in a number of places throughout the manual. You'll see that instead of Jeff being the lead ODA administrator, or LOA, he is now officially the ODA lead administrator, or OLA. Switching terms like this kind of helps everybody keep on their toes. In the first section of the Procedures Manual, communication is the big topic and serves as a reminder that all formal communication to the FAA goes through Jeff as the ODA lead administrator, and informally through Don as a project manager. As a unit member, if there is ever a question, please make sure and discuss with one of the administrators before going to the FAA. As DERs and DARs, it's second nature to call up your FAA advisor. In the ODA setting, however, organization is responsible for communicating with the FAA rather than the individual, so the process is a bit different. Authorized functions and limitations are the second section of the Procedures Manual. The ODA is required to perform its authorized functions while following the most current FAA policy, guidance, and orders. You'll see that what has been added is parens after FAA guidance callouts, implying that Westar is always using the latest revision. This makes it much easier to ensure that there's a common understanding while also lightening the load by not requiring ongoing edits. Within the ODA, unit members are responsible for following the latest FAA policy and guidance. To help everyone accomplish this, a monthly email is sent out to all unit members to notify you about any changes published during the month. This should not stop you from referring to the FAA's website or the Regulation Guidance Library, or RGL. Table 2.1 describes the functions that are authorized to the ODA and unit members, along with all the accompanying limitations. Having STC authority means that Westar, through its unit members, is able to approve technical data, operational and repair information, major alterations to the STCs it's issued, airworthiness limitations, as long as there are no changes, establish conformity inspection requirements, conform articles, test setups and installations, perform compliance inspections, accept ICA, issue standard and special airworthiness certificates, and when all of that is accomplished, issue an STC certificate. Whew, that's a lot. The authority to amend STCs was added in this revision as long as the STCs were prepared, issued, held, or Westar was involved in issuing the certificate. Westar has been able to do this in the past. It just wasn't written down anywhere. So now it's official. In doing this type of cleanup, the ODA can also issue STCs for administrative errors, STC holder name changes, or to replace a lost or destroyed certificate. The ODA is limited to which aircraft it can work on. There's a list that identifies which ones, and the ODA is limited in the technical areas it can be reviewed, which is defined in Appendix E of the manual. The ODA is allowed to provide data approvals that support a TC holders project, or also support an FAA managed project. Westar is working on something outside of the ODA scope, is doing a standard project, or is a supplier to a different company. In the function code section, you'll see that Westar has added 11180 to accept instructions for continued airworthiness, or ICA, on behalf of the AEG. Along with this additional function codes, sections in the manual were added to define the role of the ICA unit member, to define qualifications and responsibilities of the ICA-UM, and to remove the limitation that said the ODA couldn't review ICA associated with security-related projects. Jeff and Don Kleintobe will be filling this role for the ODA to direct any ICA questions their way. Along with the addition of the ICA review process, airworthiness limitations must still be approved by FAA. However, if there are no airworthiness limitations, the ODA administrator can approve that section as mentioned earlier, once the ICA has been accepted. Sections 4 and 5 are particularly important to ODA members as they discuss the responsibilities everyone has along with the capabilities the ODA requires to meet its commitment to the FAA. Other modules will go into more detail regarding ODA responsibilities and capabilities, but something you'll notice when you receive an ODA listing next time will be the addition of special delegations for engineering unit members in this revision. Adding this feature lets Westar be more specific in some of the areas people are allowed to function. Another edit in the manual came from recognizing that unit member authority is granted by the ODA, not the FAA. The delegation or assignments are made by the ODA. This is not the same as being an individual designee, so the change addresses the difference. Talking about unit member authority, Appendix D chart, which define the delegatable functions in each specific technical area, updated to include access for the authority the ODA can grant to unit members. This now shows limitations of the ODA more clearly. There may be situations where you have authority as a DER, but the ODA cannot use your capability. Example, Westar does not have structures rotor authority, so could not grant any of those function boxes in the matrices to you if you had it as a DER. Clarifying what unit members can and cannot do, also notice that clarification has been added. Unit members are not to perform a task outside their specific authority. It's always been frowned upon. Now it's actually written in the manual. The manual goes into a lot of detail regarding maintenance of the ODA listing of active unit members. How unit members are selected, trained, and terminated if necessary. The modules will explain these areas in more detail. As the FAA puts more energy into further developing organizational delegation programs, They want to see those with authority have a robust system in place that fully manages and corrects processes used so that they can count on problems being discovered and fixed without their intervention. One way they accomplish this by requiring that every ODA conduct annual internal audits. Section 9 and 13 of the Westar Procedures Manual describes the process for conducting an internal self-audit as well as the facilities worked with. In Revision C, the reasons for conducting self-audits was edited to include a couple of new objectives. 1. Reviewing unit members' work to determine if technical decisions are sound and acceptable, as well as 2. Assessing the Procedures Manual to see if the procedures are adequate. This is another area where wording in the manual was lagging behind what was actually being accomplished. Along with these newly added objectives, the audit also looks at how well the facilities used are managed, that records are being kept as promised, compliance demonstrations are in accordance with FAA policy, that the requirements of Part 183 are being met. Completing a cycle of audits helps put focus on how to make the processes used work better. In the past, the manual allowed pushing out on site visits that were required every 18 months, all manufacturing unit members, to a time when there was an available project. This has been updated to require an on-site visit every 18 months without the flexibility of waiting that was enjoyed earlier. Auditor qualifications for internal audits have also been expanded in this revision to allow another designee to conduct audits within a technical discipline. This will help in getting varied perspectives and insights during the internal audit activities, make sure an independent review is occurring. Documenting an audit is a beneficial piece of every audit as it describes what auditors reviewed, found, and why there may be an issue. The FAA is particularly interested in the results. How Westar documents the audits was updated in the manual. This documentation also facilitates the development of appropriate corrective actions. Section 17 describes the process Westar uses to address any finding that needs to be resolved. Section 11 discusses the duration of the ODA authorization. ODA authority is granted to a specific company and cannot be transferred or sold like a certificate can be, and the FAA can choose to suspend or terminate authority at any time for any reason. Because the designation as an ODA is based on these types of provisions, the ODA holder must reapply for authorization every few years and explain why their continued authorization will benefit the agency. A start must go through this renewal process every 2 years. The length of this time happens to depend on the risk associated with an organization. The one who is manufacturing critical parts or has had performance problems in the past may end up needing renewal annually. At some point, Westar finds that they are not meeting the requirements to be an ODA, such as a required unit member is no longer available, or non-compliance is found. The company is obligated to let the FAA know within 48 hours. Corrective actions can be identified and implemented to resolve problems that may surface. The biggest portion of the manual, and some may say the most important, are captured in Section 15. These are the procedures that describe how Westar initiates, plans, conducts, and closes out all of the STC projects the ODA is involved with. The intent is that the identified procedures follow the certification process defined in FAA Order 8110.4. When a project is first initiated, this manual change added a step to have the OLA review submitted applications and determine if a project is substantial or significant using FAA Order 8100.48. It also refers the reader to AC 21.101 for determining the certification basis. Another item that's been occurring, just not fully identified in the manual. When a project is determined to be within the project's scope of authorized functions and limitations, certification plan, conformity inspection plan, project notification letter are developed to coordinate with the FAA. Coordination steps are simplified in this revision with regard to certification plan concurrence reviews. No sign-off is needed if the author, a unit member, project manager, or project administrator. Concurrence is implied, saving one step when getting signatures. Another simplification is that serial numbers are no longer needed on project notification letters. Once the project is accepted by the FAA, the plan is followed as presented and concurred to by the assigned unit members. Concurrence by unit member can be made via an email response. When concurrence is received, the implication is that the person has reviewed the compliance checklist, compliance methodologies proposed, the scope of the project and believes that what has been planned is what is needed to reach a safe, compliant approval for the modification. And this review up front helps alleviate problems toward the end of a program because something was missed. Project communication and coordination with unit members is conducted via email in most circumstances. The project tracking form that has been used on past projects no longer includes due dates, nor are conformity discrepancies documented on the form. Another manual update was to clarify that engineering unit members can now approve test plans, rather than providing a recommend approval with the project administrator approving as was done in the past. The thing to remember from this change is that when testing has been completed, test reports must contain the statement, "Testing was satisfactorily completed," assuming that it was. Because the authorization to accept ICA on behalf of the AEG is new to this revision, procedures surrounding ICA review and coordination have been added to the manual, Section 15. Most unit members will probably not be as intimate with this portion of the manual as the ICA unit members, Klein, Tobe, and Jeff. Understanding the process for general purposes will be beneficial. Of the final updates to Appendix H of the manual to include revision control expectations for ICA content. Conformity and testing are a big part of every project, and doing them well by following the defined processes is particularly important for compliance. Conformity expectations were changed in this revision. Before, the manual wording said that conformity had to be completed before TIA could be issued. Now, conformity must be complete prior to executing the TIA. This offers a little bit more flexibility. Another clarification that was added to the manual was that engineering unit members conduct and witness ground evaluations and tests, flight tests, using approved test plans. In the previous revision, the wording left it open that in general, unit members conducted testing. So this clarification makes the expectation more specific. Other changes to the manual include the step for sign-offs of TIAs and RFCs. They are to be signed by the project administrator prior to distribution to unit members. Also, the Appendix G format for airplane flight manual supplements changed the signee from the OMT lead to the ODA administrator. Within Section 15, a lot of emphasis was placed on aircraft ground evaluations and writing checklists for conducting one. Aircraft ground evaluations include compliance inspections, but in a broader sense. The participating engineering unit member will be looking at the modification with respect to other installations that are on the aircraft. The hope of the FAA is that an EUM's eyes will be able to see modification interface issues that can't be seen in a drawing or substantiation report review. Since so many airplanes are unique because of the various changes an owner may have made, this is another check to make sure certain assumptions made are valid. The manual contains checklists for structural, electrical, and mechanical systems reviews in Appendix I. Steps for documenting discrepancies and resolving issues found are also described. Section 15 includes processes for using off-site facilities. By the way, the Westar facility in Chattanooga, Tennessee was added to perform STC installations as well as issuing airworthiness certificates. These areas didn't change in Revision C. Final steps to close out a project are also pretty close to what has been done in the past. The only changes in the project completion steps were updating a reference to binder folders rather than project completion folders. And the project administrator no longer needs to forward a drafted 8100-11 form to the OLA. As an ODA, many records are generated beyond the project files. Section 16 explains how all the forms, project documents, unit member records, etc. are stored and retained for the FAA. If at some time in the future Westar were to no longer function as an ODA, the FAA expects all the records that have been retained will be provided to them. Closing out the Westar manual is Section 18 that defines the reports the ODA must generate and submit to the FAA so that they have insight into all the work that may be happening with regard to repairs and alterations, as well as conformity and airworthiness certification. And finally, the appendices mentioned throughout the video that capture the ODA responsibilities agreed to, the organizational structure, the approved facilities, required capabilities, forms used by the ODA, certification plan expectations, format requirements for airplane flight manual supplements, instructions for continued airworthiness, and the new aircraft ground evaluation checklists. To conclude this briefing on the Westar ODA Procedures Manual, realize the intention was not to cover all of the process details that are defined. What you should walk away with is the understanding that you should refer to the manual whenever you accomplish a task, so that you follow what has been approved. You should also recognize that there are a lot of changes being introduced, so how many things may have been accomplished in the past may not be applicable to today. Remember to check the manual so you're sure you're doing the right thing. Finally, if something doesn't seem to be working well, let Jeff know. Westar wants the ODA to be as effective and efficient as possible. If you have any questions regarding this video training, please contact Jeff Maskowitz, the ODA Lead Administrator, at the posted phone number or email address.